Hello everyone, I'm your storyteller, and today I'm here to lead you into the shadows. I know you're using this video to help you sleep, so before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. Story 1. It was the summer of 2012. The Johnson family had just moved into their new suburban home in Aurora, Colorado. It was a modest two-story house, the kind of place where neighbors smiled politely and kids rode bikes until dusk. The Johnsons, Mark, his wife Lisa, and their 10-year-old son Ethan were ready to start fresh after Mark got a new job offer. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Mark spent his mornings reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. Lisa planted flowers in the garden, and Ethan played in the backyard with his new Labrador puppy, Max. It was an ordinary life, until it wasn't. One Thursday evening, Lisa was folding laundry in the living room while Mark was at work. Ethan was upstairs playing video games. The sun had set and the house was cloaked in shadows. The only sound was the hum of the dryer and the faint clicks of Ethan's game controller. Lisa glanced out the window. The street was quiet. Then a noise, a sharp knock at the front door. Lisa frowned. It was past 9 p.m. Who could it be? She peeked through the peephole. Nobody was there. Confused, she opened the door a crack, the hinges creaking. The cool night air rushed in. Still no one was there, just the empty street bathed in the glow of streetlights. She shrugged, closed the door and turned the lock. But as she walked back to the laundry, she heard it again. This time 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. Her heart pounded. She looked through the peephole once more. Nothing, just shadows stretching across the porch. She felt a chill creep up her spine. "Ethan?" she called. "Did you hear that?" From upstairs, Ethan shouted back, "Hear what?" Lisa shook her head. Maybe she was just tired. She returned to the laundry, trying to brush off the unease, but the moment she bent over the basket, she heard the knock again. Louder this time, almost angry. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Before she could reach the door, Max, the puppy, let out a low, menacing growl from the hallway. His ears flattened, his eyes fixed on the door. The knock stopped. Lisa's hand trembled as she reached for Max's collar. The silence was deafening. Then a whisper, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. "Let me in." She froze. The voice was childlike, soft but cold, as if spoken through lips made of ice. Her knees felt weak. She looked down at Max, who was now whimpering, his tail tucked between his legs. The door remained shut, but dread seeped through the cracks. Lisa backed away slowly. "Don't open it. Don't open it." Her instincts screamed at her. She grabbed her phone and dialed Mark. Mark picked up immediately. His calm voice grounded her, but when she explained what happened, he laughed it off. "It's probably just kids playing pranks," he said. "Don't worry, I'll be home soon." Lisa nodded, trying to convince herself he was right, but deep down she knew it wasn't just a prank. That night Mark came home and they double-checked all the locks. They settled into bed, trying to shake off the lingering tension. At 3 a.m., Mark woke up suddenly. A scraping sound echoed through the house, like nails on wood. He sat up, heart racing. He turned to Lisa, who was still asleep. The sound came again, louder this time. He slipped out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat he kept in the closet. The hallway was dark, the air thick with something he couldn't name. As he crept downstairs, the scraping sound stopped. He flicked on the light. The living room was empty, the door locked. Everything looked normal, too normal. Then he noticed it. The front door, deep jagged scratches gouged into the wood as if made by claws. His breath caught in his throat. Suddenly from behind him a whisper, "Let me in." He spun around, the bat raised, but no one was there. The next morning, Mark and Lisa examined the door. The scratches were undeniable. They decided not to tell Ethan, not wanting to scare him. But Ethan had his own story. That afternoon he came inside, pale and shaken. "Mom," he whispered, "there's a boy outside. He asked me to let him in." Lisa's blood ran cold. "What boy, Ethan?" "I don't know," he said, his voice trembling. "He had black eyes, and his skin was all gray. He said he used to live here." Lisa's stomach twisted. She gripped Ethan's shoulders. "Did you let him in?" Ethan shook his head, tears welling up. Number Max wouldn't stop barking. That night they packed their bags and left the house, staying with Mark's sister across town. The next day they returned to grab more belongings. The house felt different, colder, emptier. But one thing was clear. On the front door, etched deeply into the wood, were the words, "You should have let me in." They never returned to that house. A few months later, it was sold. The new owners didn't stay long, and sometimes late at night, in the quiet suburb of Aurora, neighbors still hear it, a faint, relentless knocking, and a whisper cold and desperate. Let me in. Story 3. Hello everyone, I'm your storyteller, and today I'm here to lead you into the shadows. I know you're using this video to help you sleep, so before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. 2017, Manchester, England. The hospital corridors were cold, sterile, and eerily quiet. It was 2 a.m., the dead of night, when reality feels like it's hanging by a thread. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the halls, punctuated only by the faint sound of beeping monitors and the shuffle of nurses on their rounds. Claire, a 28-year-old nurse, was on the night shift. Her feet ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. She had been working double shifts to pay off her student loans. Claire had always been calm under pressure. Night shifts didn't bother her until that night. Claire's shift started like any other. She checked patients' charts, administered medication, and comforted the restless. The hospital was quiet, almost too quiet. Her co-worker Eli, a young orderly, gave her a tired smile as they passed in the hall. "Almost there, Claire. 2 more hours." She nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just 2 more." But the feeling of unease settled in her gut. Something was off. The air felt thicker somehow. She brushed it off as fatigue. At 2:30 a.m., Claire headed to the 3rd floor, the surgical wing. It was mostly empty at night, the patients either asleep or in recovery. As she walked down the dimly lit hallway, she noticed the door to room 306 was slightly ajar. That was odd. She remembered closing it earlier. She peeked inside. The room was dark. The patient, Mr. Harrow, recovering from knee surgery, was sound asleep. She pulled the door shut quietly and turned to leave. But as she did, she caught something out of the corner of her eye. A shadow. It slipped past the edge of her vision, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She turned around, scanning the corridor. Empty. Only the flickering glow of the exit sign at the end of the hall. "Eli?" she whispered. No answer. She shook her head. "You're just tired." But the feeling of being watched gnawed at her. Claire continued her rounds, but the air felt colder now. The lights seemed dimmer. The hospital, usually a place of routine and order, felt alien. Wrong. She reached room 310 and checked her notes. The patient was an elderly woman, Mrs. Whitmore, who was recovering from a fall. Claire gently pushed the door open. Her breath caught in her throat. Mrs. Whitmore was sitting up in bed, staring at the corner of the room, her eyes wide, her mouth trembling. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Claire whispered, stepping closer. "What's wrong?" The old woman didn't look at her. She just kept staring into the dark corner. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "There's someone here." Claire's stomach twisted. She turned to look, but the corner was empty, just shadows. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's no one." The old woman grabbed her wrist with a strength that didn't belong to frail fingers. "He's right there," she hissed. "He doesn't like being seen." Claire's heart pounded. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. She swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "It's okay, Mrs. Whitmore. You're just having a bad dream." The grip on her wrist loosened. Mrs. Whitmore blinked, as if waking from a trance. She looked confused. "Oh, maybe I am," she murmured. Claire tucked her in, forcing a smile. "Get some rest." As she left the room, she couldn't shake the chill that ran through her. Claire checked the clock. 3 a.m. The hour when the veil between the living and the dead is said to be thinnest. She didn't believe in that stuff, not really, but tonight, she headed back to the nurse's station. Eli was there, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Claire," he whispered, Did you see anyone in the hallway?" Her blood froze. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "I saw someone, just now, a man in a hospital gown, but his face, it was like it was blurred, like I couldn't focus on it. I followed him down the hall, but he disappeared." Claire's breath came in shallow gasps. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't her imagination. Something was wrong. Suddenly the lights flickered. The monitors around them let out a low, distorted beep. Then, silence. A cold wind blew through the hallway, though all the windows were shut. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on them. They heard it together. A faint dragging sound, feet shuffling across the floor. It was coming from room 306. Claire and Eli exchanged a glance, fear etched in their faces. They moved slowly, the hallway stretching before them like a tunnel. The door to room 306 was now wide open. Claire's heart pounded in her ears. She stepped inside. Mr. Harrow's bed was empty. The sheets were rumpled. The IV drip swayed gently. Then from behind the curtain they heard it. A ragged breath. Claire's voice shook. "Mr. Harrow?" No answer. She gripped the edge of the curtain and, in one swift motion, pulled it back. The bed was empty, but on the floor, smeared across the cold tiles, were bloody footprints. They led to the door and stopped. Claire felt a scream rise in her throat, but she choked it back. Eli whispered, his voice trembling, "Where did he go?" Before she could answer, they heard it again. A whisper so close it brushed against their ears. "He never left." The lights went out. They found Mr. Harrow the next morning. He was in the basement, huddled in a dark corner, his eyes blank, his lips murmuring the same words over and over. "He doesn't like being seen. He doesn't like being seen." Claire never took another night shift. Eli quit the next day. And the hospital, well, it still operates, but the staff know some things that walk the halls at night don't wear name tags. And if you're ever there, in the dead of night, listen carefully. You might hear the shuffle of feet behind you. Just don't turn around, because he doesn't like being seen. Story 2. It was 2015, a cold October night in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I was a college freshman trying to earn some extra money. Babysitting seemed like an easy gig. A quiet night, a little cash, no big deal. Or so I thought. I didn't know that night would be burned into my mind forever, that it would leave me questioning what's real and what isn't. The family was the Millers, nice people. Laura, the mom, was a lawyer, and David, the dad, was a mechanic. Their daughter Sophie was 5 years old, a quiet little girl with blonde hair and a shy smile. Laura had called me that afternoon. "It's just for a few hours. We're going to a late dinner, and we'll be back by midnight." Easy enough, right? I arrived at their house at 7 p.m. It was a cozy 2-story home with a picket fence. The porch light flickered slightly, but I didn't think much of it. Laura greeted me at the door. "Thank you so much for coming, Jess." She looked a little stressed, but she smiled warmly. "Sophie's already had dinner, and she's in her room playing. She goes to bed at 8. I nodded. "No problem. Enjoy your night out." Laura's smile faltered just a bit. "Call us if anything weird happens." "Weird?" I frowned. "Weird how?" She shook her head quickly. "Nothing. Just, it's an old house. Sometimes the pipes make noises." Then she and David left, and the door clicked shut behind them. The house was suddenly too quiet. I found Sophie in her room upstairs, sitting on the floor with her dolls. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Hi, Jess." "Hey, Sophie. What you playing?" She held up a doll with tangled hair. "We're having a tea party. Want to join?" I laughed softly and sat down beside her. "Sure." We played for about half an hour. Everything felt normal, cozy even. But as I poured pretend tea into a tiny cup, I noticed Sophie's eyes dart toward the closet door. It was closed, but something about the way she glanced at it made my skin crawl. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded quickly, too quickly. "Uh-huh. Can we play in the living room now?" Her voice was tight, almost pleading. I hesitated, then smiled. "Sure, let's go." As we stood up, I heard a faint thump from the closet. I froze. "What was that?" I whispered. Sophie's eyes widened, her tiny hand gripping mine. She whispered back, "He doesn't want to play." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't want to know. We hurried downstairs and I turned on every light in the living room. The glow from the TV cast comforting shadows on the walls. Sophie curled up on the couch with a blanket. I tried to shake off the chill in my bones. It's just an old house. Pipes. That's all. I kept repeating it in my head. 8 p.m. came, and it was time for bed. "Come on, Soph. Let's get you tucked in." Her grip tightened on my hand. "Can you leave the hallway light on?" "Of course." I settled her under the covers and kissed her forehead. Her eyes darted to the closet again. "Good night, Sophie." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Good night, Jess." As I left the room, I turned the hallway light on and left her door cracked open. The soft glow spilled into her room. I went back downstairs and flipped through the channels on the TV. The unease in my stomach slowly faded. I almost convinced myself that the thump earlier was just my imagination, until the baby monitor crackled to life. A soft whisper. "Jess." My heart stopped. I stared at the monitor screen. Sophie's bed was empty. I bolted upstairs, my legs trembling. "Sophie?" The hallway light flickered. Her door was wide open. I stepped into her room. The bed was empty. The blanket crumpled on the floor. The closet door was ajar, revealing nothing but darkness. I swallowed hard. Sophie, this isn't funny. Where are you? Then I heard it. From inside the closet, a soft, ragged whisper. Jess, help. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pulled the closet door open. Empty. But in the corner of the closet, where the shadows were deepest, two small eyes blinked. Not Sophie's eyes. They were too dark, too empty. The figure shifted, and a cold wind brushed past me. The eyes disappeared. A faint giggle echoed in the room. I turned around, my chest tight with fear. Sophie was standing by the window, staring at me with wide, tear-streaked eyes. He doesn't want to play anymore. I grabbed her and ran downstairs, my heart pounding in my ears. We sat on the couch, the lights blazing around us. I held her close, whispering that everything would be okay, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The clock ticked slowly toward midnight. When Laura and David came home, I almost cried with relief. Laura took one look at my face and Sophie's trembling body and knew. You saw him, didn't you? She whispered. I nodded, my throat dry. What? What is he? Laura's eyes were haunted. We don't know. He's always been here. He doesn't like being ignored. I didn't ask any more questions. I handed Sophie to her mother, grabbed my bag, and left the house without looking back. I never babysat for the Millers again. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I still hear it. A faint whisper, a soft giggle, and I wonder, did something follow me home?